Welcome to the Chapter 5 lecture where we're going to cover planning in human resources. Oops. So here's some of the learning objectives. We're going to be able to define HRP, which is Human Resource Planning, explain the strategy linked to HRP and the steps within the process, summarize the relationship between HRP and organizational planning, and describe the different methods used for forecasting your HR needs. Give me a second. Well, I'm having a technical issue. Let's see. There we go. Some of the other objectives. You should be able to discuss the purpose of skills inventory, describe succession planning, define human resource information system, and be able to distinguish between the internet and the intranet. Explain what Web 2.0 is, define the concept of cloud computing, and distinguish among software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. Now, HR planning is the process of determining the needs that you have, the human resource needs of an organization, and ensuring that that organization has the right number of qualified people that are in the right jobs at the right time. Our need. There's a significant lead time, right? There's a time that you need that exists between the recognition of when that job needs to be filled and securing a qualified person, the right person, to fill the need to get the job done. And effective HRP can help you reduce turnover because it keeps your employees connected to and aware of various career opportunities within the company. If you have various jobs that are coming up in the company and you don't let your internal workers know, but you post these jobs to job boards outside of the company, guess what? Morale lowers because their thought process is, well, you obviously don't think that any of us are qualified for this job, or you're going to possibly eliminate my job. And so I'm going to give you the same level of care that you gave me in return. And productivity goes down, people start calling off work, people quit, people find a way to get themselves fired, so on and so forth. Now, strategic business planning is always focused on identifying certain factors that are critical for the success of the organization. And there are some clear statements of your mission and a commitment of your team members to that mission. And there's explicit statements of assumptions. There's always going to be assumptions whenever you're planning, right? You can plan a trip somewhere. There's going to be some assumptions about how that trip is going to unfold, or whether or not there's going to be any potential encounters with bad weather or potential crime that you feel that you may encounter, or there's assumptions that you're going to stop 20 times because your mom loves to stop at all of the Stuckies and Loves and other souvenir shops along the way, right? So there's assumptions that are always going to be in planning. The plan of action is going to be is always tied to the resources that are available and those that you can acquire, and that also includes any people that are trained and highly talented that'll be valuable assets to your organization. Table 5.1 shows you the link of HRP to the business strategy. And so, of course, you must be familiar with the business strategy in order to properly create this plan. And the ability to identify the HR implications of your business strategy and identify those issues that can affect your objectives as a company, and then be able to notify the appropriate functional managers that can help you address those issues and the impact. And then reviewing the strategic planning process to identify new opportunities that you can involve HR personnel. So when you link strategy to HRP, your HR managers are going to serve as consultants to your line managers, right? They're going to be the support staff. They're going to be able to come in and just share their opinions, their advice. They're not going to force or mandate your line managers to do anything. They're coming in as consultants. You're concerned with the people management implications of specific objectives and strategies tied to the company. And so your line managers have a responsibility to respond to those implications that HR has pointed out and how those are tied to objectives and strategies of the company. There is a time frame that you take into consideration. Short term is always 0 to 2 years. Intermediate is always, and you can also call it mid-range, is always 2 to 5 years. And your long range is anything beyond 5 years. So there's an evolving process. There's stages that take place in HRP. Stage 1 is that you have no long-term business plans. There's really little to no HR planning involved. Stage 2, you now have a long-term plan in place, but you're a little skeptical of your HR plan. Stage 3, you're engaging in some aspect of HR planning, but they're not fully integrated into your long-range business plan. Stage 4, you are really doing a great deal of HR planning, and your top managers are very enthusiastic and supportive about the process. Stage 5, you're treating HR planning as important and very vital to the long-term success of the business plan. It is literally embedded within the business plan. And so when you have that stage 5 experience, that means you have top, middle, and frontline involvement, engagement, and HR is now deeply embedded, which means all of your employees are deeply embedded and considered in the process. Figure 5.1 shows you the steps. You can see where you determine the impact of organizational objectives on specific units within the organization. You're defining the skills and expertise that's needed to meet the objectives. So that's where your demand for the human resources come into play. You're determining what extra HR requirements that you need that are tied to your current human resources. So what are you going to need in addition to what you already have? And then developing action plans to meet those anticipated needs. So here's some objectives that you have to determine. Your organizational objectives are statements of what you expect to end up with at the end of the day, at the end of the year, at the end of 50 years. And it's designed to give the organization and all the employees direction and purpose. You then know the aha, it's the why, it's the what, it's the how. And so there's a cascading approach to setting these objectives. And it's designed to involve all levels of management in this planning process. So it's not just a top-level manager, it's not just mid-level managers. It is going to be top, middle, and frontline, all 3 levels. And so here's a cascading approach where you see the statement of the mission, right? The mission is the why we are here, why we started the business, why do we come in and work. Your top managers set that mission statement. They also help establish the long-range objectives and strategic plans, right? Those are always things that are going out for a multitude of years. Your middle managers come in and they work with top management to then set some short-range performance objectives, and then bringing in the supervisors, which is your frontline managers. You're then breaking things down by division or department to focus on objectives for those areas, and then coming up with objectives for your subunits, and then of course setting those objectives into play. And so we have different environmental factors that affect HR, and environmental factors are both internal and external to the organization. You can have government influences, and that could be taxation, that could be penalties, that could be various regulations that have been in play that impact your industry, impact your company directly. There are economic conditions that can take place. We have inflation, we have economic downturns, we have so many different things. It can be the economy was impacted by war in another country, and that impacted trade, importing and exporting of goods, which directly impacts your company. Competition, your competition can step up big time and really put pressure on you, or they can go out of business and open up a greater market share for you to take advantage of. Changes in the workforce. It can be that your workforce is aging. It can be that you're bringing in more technologically advanced workers. You're bringing in younger workers. You could be laying off workers. People could be quitting. You could be expanding your workforce to include workers from other countries, so on and so forth. So there's various environmental factors that can impact the needs of human resources. And so how you go about forecasting those needs, you have to be able to come up with some estimates managerially. And that's where you're making a judgmental forecast that calls on all the managers to estimate what their future staffing needs are. How many team members are you going to need by the end of the year? Within 2 years, within 5 years, within 10 years, so on and so forth. And then you come up with an analysis based on scenarios, and you can use different environmental scanning data to help develop alternative workforce scenarios. So you have your current scenario that you can play out, and then come in to factor some of those different environmental situations that I mentioned here. Factor those in to see how that impacts your workforce and come up with some different alternatives. There's the Delphi technique, and you're using a panel of experts that are experts within the field, within the industry, to make some independent estimates of what your future demand from your customers will be. And so you have an intermediary that presents each expert's forecast and their assumptions, and those forecasts and assumptions are then presented to other members of the panel. And then each expert is allowed to revise their forecast as they desire, because they may then all of a sudden see something that that they didn't take into consideration, and then they decide to tweak their forecast. And this process continues until there is a general consensus, right? Or there is something that a composite sketch or outline can actually emerge, where you can make a blanket forecast for the organization. Then we have benchmarking, and that's where you're going to go through a thorough examination of the internal practices and procedures that your company undergoes, and you're going to measure those practices and procedures against the ways that other successful organizations operate. So when they are successful in certain elements and you're not, you're then able to look at what you're doing compared to what they're doing, and you can actually adjust your methods. So we have a time series analysis, and that's where you're looking at the past staffing levels that were used to project future HR requirements. And a personnel ratio is used to allocate the total requirements for various categories within the company, or to estimate the requirements for non-key groups, meaning groups that are not, I don't want to say valuable, but they are not vital to the operation, right? That their job, they can be swapped out, 20 times. You can have 20 different people come in and assume their role within the company. So you look at those ratios. Productivity ratios. This is using historical data. So you're using data from a long period of time, and it's going to help you examine the past levels of your productivity of your workers. And so productivity is going to equal the workload divided by the number of people performing the work. And the constant or systematic relationships are found. And then your HR requirements can be computed by dividing the predicted workloads by P. Right? So once you've come up with that, then you're able to figure out how we determine productivity of a single worker and expand that out, how we can scale that out so that we can get 20 people to perform at that same level. And that means we can have X number of widgets created within X number of period of time. And then when you can figure that out, then guess what? You can figure out based on your past sales, you can look at and predict future sales. And so we also do a regression analysis. And that's where you're looking at past levels of various workload indicators. And from that, you're examining any kind of statistical relationships with your staffing levels. And whenever you can find some really significant, strong relationships, they're not medium relationships, not weak. I mean, they are so significant. Then you can then create that regression model. It has to be something that's of great abundance. So that's the reason why when you talk about research and they say that something was not significant or statistically significant, is that if there's not enough, if it's not a cluster enough, if you don't see enough, if it's not a whole pizza, it's not a half pizza, you only see 2 slices of pizza, that is clearly not enough for us to even report on. And vice versa. If you see that 60-70% of the pizza was eaten, then you could possibly say that the pizza was deemed good or edible enough, right? So that's just that kind of example, but that's literally what that is. So you're looking at the various indicators so that you can find some kind of statistical relationship and using that data. This is where your quantitative methods come into play. And so there's also an inventory of skills that are created, and you're looking at biographical information and other information on your employees to help inventory the types of skills that are needed to perform a job. And so you'll look at personal data on them. You'll look at skills and special qualifications, their salary and job history, some company data. So you'll look at the historical context of the company, and how it's performing, the capacity of each individual, and any special preferences that they have when performing a job. There's some advantages of using skills inventory in the fact that it can furnish quick and accurate evaluative skills that you can then be able to use within an organization, and you can better determine who to promote and who to transfer, and how to create and conduct future employment training, and also development programs for your managers. Now, with your management inventory, this is very specialized and it's expanded on the skills inventory. This is a greater in-depth, deeper, more extensive research that's done so that you can look at your current management team. And so there is a brief assessment of their past performance, and then their potential for advancing up that corporate ladder. So there's some anticipated changes in personnel. Of course, you have people that are going to retire, people that will be transferred and promoted, and then of course there's other factors such as people passing away, resigning, being fired, and then, of course, things that you just find difficult to predict. And so with retirements, those are forecasted with reasonable accuracy from information that is provided in the skills inventory. Transfers and promotions, that's estimated by taking into account the ages of your employees in specific jobs and the requirements of the organization. So if you have employees that are already 60, the the likelihood of a promotion, depending on the job, may be relatively low, as well as the likelihood of you transferring a 60-year-old to Beijing, China, may also be relatively low if that transfer is expected to be 5, 10, 15 years, and you know that they are going to be up for retirement at 65, 67, for instance. And the same could be true when you factor in transfers. Someone may be 18, and you may look at, and this isn't, and let me say this is not age discrimination. It's taking into consideration your employees and the likelihood of what they are willing to do, what adjustments they're willing to make, what changes they're willing to embrace, and for how long, and the requirements of your company. What does your company need? So if your company needs a person who can go to Beijing and be there for 5 years, a person who could be 60, as well as a person who could be 18, may not be your best candidate. The 18-year-old has not experienced much of anything, and so there could be major culture shock. There could be other factors that come into play. This is not set in stone. It's not necessarily the truth, but these are what you have to be able to try to determine. There's when we look at the other factors, we're looking at past experience and historical records that can provide you useful information in the areas that are tied to deaths and resignations, discharges. Adding human resources to your development action plans. Of course, contingency workers, which those are workers who could be temp workers, that can be independent contractors, that can come around seasonally or during high-low periods in the workplace. And also outsourcing any work and jobs allows your company to accommodate any kind of ups and downs in the demand for having more human resources made available. And agencies provide both testing and training for employees before they are hired, for the most part. Now, there's some ways that you can downsize your workforce, and that can be layoffs, right? Terminations, where you just outright fire people. Early retirement, where someone decides to retire at 45, 55, 60 rather than 65 or 67. And voluntary resignation, where someone just voluntarily quits. You know, they've found bigger, better, or they've chosen to stay home with family or whatever. There's other approaches for reducing your costs with HR. Reclassifications, where you can downgrade job responsibilities, you can demote an employee, or you can do a combination of the two. Transfers, when you move someone to another part of the organization. Work sharing is where you, which is also called, you can seek to limit the number of layoffs and terminations by reducing hours amongst your employees. And then job sharing is where you have 2 or more part-time individuals doing the work that normally one full-time person would do. There's succession planning that you have to take in consideration, and that's where you identify certain people that can fill future positions throughout the organization, and so you're considering past performance and the future potential of these people. And then emphasis is where you're developing people rather than naming replacements. You're really focused on those people being in the company long term, and so you're going to invest a lot of time and talent and resources in developing them. There's factors for success in evolution, from replacement planning to succession planning, and that's where you're going to define the different competencies that people need to have in order to move upwards in the company, and focusing on critical positions and evaluating your current talent pool and identifying individual development needs. HRIS is a database system that contains all the relevant HR information and provides facilities for maintaining and accessing this data. And there's some advantages and disadvantages. Advantages, it gets rid of paper files maintained by HR and other organizations, areas in the organization. Disadvantages, it could be costly and labor intensive to implement the system. Applying for HRS, of course, there's clerical, financial planning, turnover analysis, succession planning, risk management, compliance, accident reporting, strategic planning, and HR planning. And when you look at human resources and its tie into the internet, you can see there's some real value in the use of the internet for HR professionals. Managers are able to access massive amounts of information. And using an intranet, that's where you have a private computer network that provides products and technologies using multimedia applications within the organization. So it's an information hub for the entire organization. And a web portal is where you put in place where specific groups, such as your business partners or your customers or vendors, can have access to your company's intranet. So it'll be like a login privileges for those groups. Web 2.0 is a second generation of internet that focuses on user content control. You have a lot of online collaboration. You can share information and data between the users, and it's used to perform background checks and job screening, because now you can look them up through various social networking sites. So understand that if you use your real name and your email address on any of your social media sites, you have HR professionals and corporate recruiters that use those sites to be able to find out what you're doing and sharing online. Cloud computing, there's software platforms and infrastructures that are sold as service remotely via the internet. So everything is in the cloud. It is not locked into your hardwired server. And there's various types. You have SAS, which is software as a service. You have platform as a service and infrastructure as a service. Software as a service is a new approach where it involves users accessing business applications over the internet. They provide products over the internet on a pay-as-you-go basis for a monthly subscription fee. There are various benefits. There's no large capital expenditure. There's fewer hassles related to managing the systems, and it could be up and running within days or even hours after signing a contract. You can actually have access to it. For platform as a service, the cloud providers deliver a computing platform, which includes the OS, which is your operating system, a database, web server, and programming language execution environment, and you can be able to develop and run the software solutions on a cloud platform. For the infrastructure as a service, this is where equipment is outsourced and used to support operations. The service provider owns the equipment and is responsible for housing, running, and maintaining it, and you as the user, you're only paying on a per-use basis. So with that, that is the end of this lecture. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me at nbryant@atlantatech.edu. Thank you.